Dice are rolling, darkness falls. Inside the GM Studios halls. Tabletop games where nightmares creep. In a realm where sanity is lost and weak. Welcome to the abyss where dreams shatter. Inside the GM studio, nothing else matters. Blood and chaos, the dark arts unfold. In the realm of role-playing, where legends are told.
Hello out there, and welcome back to the Inside the GM Studio side quest episode, where we field questions from the internet, doing some hot takes. I am your host, David.
I'm Matt.
And I'm going to get right at it. I'm going to toss this die and get a 18. I feel like I got 18 last time.
No, you didn't. You got a... Wait, did you?
16?
I don't remember. Let's see, 18. Okay.
Okay.
This one comes from Left-Legged Octopus on our Ask Game Masters
Okay.
with the question, do I let my players write their endings? I've been running a weekly D&D game for the last 6 years. We've had some party members leave, some new join, but consistently met every week, either in person or online every week. Well done, sir. Right there. I mean, kudos. 6 years. Wow, damn. This has been all the same campaign. The players started out at level 1 and are now level 17. Jesus Christ, there's another one. It's a lot like David. We talked about this the other day. 6 years, only got to level 17. That seems like a long time. And we will be wrapping up the game in the next few weeks, 6 sessions maximum, as my wife and I are having a kid. Braggart. Now that the brag is over, called that shit. I'm debating how to wrap up the campaign. The final showdown and Big Bad Evil Guy are locked in, but assuming my players win the day, how do we wrap it up? Some of my players have asked to write their own endings. I'm partially okay with this, but worry that they will either rectify parts of the story or change NPCs to better fit the end that they want that may not be true to the story. An example, one player wants to save an NPC which they corrupted. The player wanted power and had already formed a bargain with the devil, so the devil said to spread his dominion and get others to accept his quote-unquote gifts. So the player found an NPC who was depressed and had a very low spot and offered them a little, quote, fix. I worry that if they write their own end, they may just fix that mistake. So do I relinquish control over to the ending of the world I built, or do I put guidelines in place? Any help would be appreciated.
We had a similar question not a while back, to the point where I almost thought it was the same question. I believe that one was kind of based on how to do a proper epilogue.
Yeah.
Which ostensibly is what this question is. So I guess forgive me if any of my answers to this particular question are redundant, but I understand what his concerns are. One, you've worked hard to build a world that has a certain trajectory, a certain tone, and in this case, it sounds like consequences for the player's actions. And on one hand, you want the players to have a satisfying ending to their character arcs, but on the other hand, like you don't want them to undercut or unravel some things that have been marquee pillar moments, especially if it allows them to hand wave away any of their failures. So that is a sticky wicket. As a general rule, though, I guess I just believe firmly that you want your players to be satisfied with the campaign. And if you've played this long with them, you should have an understanding. It sounds like he might have some instincts that his players might try to do that. So there's nothing wrong with setting some guidelines. Like, for instance, establishing what happens with your character is one thing, but writing the ending takes it out of the GM's hands entirely. So you might want to have a talk with the players to try to go, okay, here's the, I guess, rules of the game, so to speak. I don't want you unwriting or reconciling any things that were undoing anything that has been done already. If there's a particular aspect with an NPC or your character that you think needs to be buttoned up, then by all means do that. Um, I would like if you just think about it in the terms of saying yes, frame it like that. That's probably the best way to think about it is if it's an improv session, then the players should be saying yes to everything that the GM and that they have crafted up to this point. If they're saying no to something and they're trying to undo it, that's a problem. And you can let them know I am fine to allow you to craft your own endings, provided they are add-ons and not deletions or
Oh,
rewriting.
that's a good way to say it.
Yeah, add on, say yes to the things that have already happened in the campaign. There's nothing wrong with the characters, for instance, exploring how they cope with or in some way try to redeem themselves for a past mistake, or a mistake. All mistakes happen in the past. Um, so if your characters have, your players have an appetite for something like a redemption arc, no need for them to say, oh, well, I kind of brought this character that I corrupted back from the dark side. And from a pure storytelling standpoint, that's kind of cheap anyway. You don't really see that a lot. Like, typically, what happens is if a character fails someone, that's a failure, and it just kind of is a stain on them. And then the way they redeem themselves is when a similar situation comes up, they're not trying to undo the past so much as illustrate what they've learned about themselves and how to be better. And so when a similar situation comes up and they're faced with a similar moral choice, they make the morally correct choice, whatever that might be for your world. It could be a variety of different things. And so in that way, it kind of tacks on and gives the characters an epilogue. However, for characters that have done particularly egregious things, you might want to consider and talk with the players as to whether such a redemption arc is appropriate. In the case of, it sounds like the player in question is playing a warlock. If they had some sort of pact with some sort of demon or whatever, devil, he said actually,
Yeah.
then you might want to consider having a variety of different tones to each character's ending. That maybe that character gets a particularly dark ending, and maybe other characters get a more bright ending. This, excuse me, this will depend largely on whether you want a cohesive end, and in which case you go, okay, you probably want a satisfying end if it's going to be cohesive, and in which case try to communicate to your players what the spirit of the end of the campaign is. Is this a situation where all of the party are now, they've ventured together all these years? I don't know how much time in game time it would be, but 6 years is a decent amount of time and probably actually appropriate to get to level 17, 18 if you're playing 4 to 5 hours a week every week. And you're not just handing out experience points and milestones like they're fucking candy. A level should take what, 10, 12 sessions to achieve. So let's just say it's 10 or 11. That's 2 to 3 months of game time. So 10 levels is 3.5 years. And so 20 levels is 6 or 7 years. That's appropriate. But talk with them in the spirit of the end of the campaign that you would, I don't know, I don't want to say would like to see, because frankly you should be giving the players the ending they want. but try to explain to them that you the end of the game needs to be satisfying for you too, and you want to give them what they want, but you also don't want to feel like all the story and everything you wrote has been in vain, because that removes the marquee elements of what you've worked toward. So it probably depends on whether some of the more organic threads were brought into your campaign uh, throughout the course of it. Some players might feel like they had character arcs that really never closed because the main plot was at the fore. And so you really don't want the players to feel like, well, what the heck? I had like this backstory and this character arc that I was working on for like, 10 or 12 levels or whatever. And I was a good sport about just letting the main plot run its course. But now that we're getting to the end, I'm realizing, well, I thought maybe all along, maybe that would come back into the main plot or the GM would incorporate it. And you never really did. And I would like to just, at least at a high level, scratch that itch and just say that that arc comes to an end in a way that was satisfying to me. You don't want to rob the players of the ability to do that, especially because it shows some humility on your part as a GM to acknowledge, look, I can't manage four, five, six players, and they all have maybe at least probably one character arc, maybe even two or three. And when you have a main plot and all these moving parts, you can't give each of them the time that they deserve. So try not to rob them of that, but just I would express your concerns with their ability, and if you want to set rules that are in place, that's not necessarily out of line as your role as a GM, but at least I would certainly err on the side of allowing them more flexibility. The campaign's over. What are you worried about there
That's what
being
I was
future
going to say. Yeah.
consequences? It's like it's done, and if this is the ending they want, then where's the harm? You want them satisfied so that they'll want to play more, like you're having a kid or whatever. But that doesn't mean that D&D is totally out of the realm of possibility down the road. Kid gets to be in school or whatever, maybe you have a little more flexibility and free time. You're not going to be able to play every weekend, I guarantee you that, but you play once a month game or whatever, and you want the players hungry for a new experience with your game. And if they walk away feeling a little railroaded or like their character arcs weren't allowed to come to fruition, uh, then they will feel that. You gotta acknowledge that if you played for 17 levels over 6 years, the players are somewhat invested in these arcs and how they see things playing out for their characters. But I don't know his players, so I don't know if they're gonna try to you know whatever. But even if they did, even if they like undercut and underwrote something, like toward what benefit? It's not like they're doing it to get gamesmanship, to get a magic item or to gain an extra level or to whatever. It's like, well, what are they going
Yeah.
to do? It's just like a narrative thing. Who cares?
Yeah. Like you said, it's the end. It's them telling what the end of their character's career is.
Yeah. And so there's no problem with just allowing them to do whatever. It's like the problems that typically arise with player autonomy and creativity and allowing them to just have free reign are the consequences for the world, the consequences for the campaign moving forward. You can't just say, like, if there's one character just said, like, I ascended to be king and I like ruled over these lands, like, well, big deal. It's not like moving forward in the campaign. Now he has a castle and an army that he can use to break the adventure.
Yeah.
It's not that big of a deal. But talking through it with your players and cautioning them that, like, to come up with an ending that's in the spirit of your campaign. Like maybe it's been tough going, and maybe it's been like a hard fought campaign. The world is hard fought, and then now they just kind of in an epilogue or whatever do a hand wave where everything comes to the character easy at this point. Like they had to fight for every gold coin throughout the whole campaign, and then now they just get mountains of wealth just dumped in their lap, and it's like that's not really with keeping in the spirit of whatever campaign you set, but just take the pulse of your players' sensibilities, communicate to them what kind of arcs would be inappropriate. Don't tell them what would be appropriate, but just tell them, here are my concerns about what would be inappropriate to end the campaign on. And I'm not going to tell you what to do, but you probably should have a good sense of it if you've played in this world for all this time and you're familiar with your character. Um, it should be organic. If they've grown attached to these characters, they should have an awareness about what's um, what's in line. And I guess I'm just a bigger fan of trusting your players rather than treating them like children.
Yeah, I am a huge fan of the epilogue at the end of a campaign. I've only been able to do it really for long lasting campaigns that went to level 20 or level 30 from back in fourth edition days. I've only done it like 3 or 4 times. But I've always done an epilogue after Call of Cthulhu games, even one shots when I would run them at Gen Con or at any other con. And with those, people were already, they know what they're getting into if they're going to go play Call of Cthulhu. So if they survive to the end, and I ask them what happened to their character, it usually ended in tragedy no matter what. They would
Yeah.
come up with a story that they ended up, committing suicide later, or they went insane much later. They never had the same life after their ordeals in the adventure, the scenario. And it's the same thing with D&D. Like this one, the questioner was talking about the guy that wants to kind of rectify his mistake in this. Now, if they wanted to say, go ahead and you can do that, let's hear what happened. And he says that after a couple weeks or a couple days, I just went back and said, I'm sorry, I'm going to make this better. That's not a really good ending. If it took years, like it was his last thing that he did in his life in order to make this good, that's a great ending.
Yeah, that it really is because you can compress as much time as you want, and there's kind of an opportunity for splitting the baby too, where it's like maybe maybe the character endeavors to correct this mistake and they're just never able to.
Right. Yeah. That was the other thing that I
But you,
thought of.
yeah, and it's just think about what's appropriate. If you have the kind of character that was like corrupting people within the narrative, try to try to nudge the characters in a direction that says, okay, what has been your character's biggest growth throughout their adventuring career, and how can you have that manifest itself some way in the epilogue? Maybe they have turned over a new page and they have all this guilt, um, but untangling a thing that they did like a bad thing is again, it's just really cheap. It's like when they kill off characters in a movie or a TV show only just to bring them back the next
Yeah.
episode. It's like
Mm.
it really neuters things. And uh, if thoughtful players have played characters through 17 levels, then they should revel in both sides. That's what makes characters interesting is their contradictions, the tension between their inner struggle and the outer struggle, between doing what's right and what's expedient, what's good and what's self-serving, and so or noble and self-serving, I guess, as opposite ends of the spectrum. But like I think you do well to kind of like just trust your players and just have your finger on the pulse of what's likely. I don't He doesn't illuminate for us why he suspects a character might want to do that.
Mm.
Because if he did it in the time, then he should probably try to own that mistake and what it did. And even if he doesn't or she doesn't, I don't know if it's a I think he
Mm.
said he. Um, Even if they don't, like it's really no big harm. Like they're really only harming their own character's legacy, for lack of a better word, to like give them this really cheap ending for like an otherwise whatever. And if the other players in particular don't shy away from and they're more in the spirit, then this is the last touchstone you're going to have with this character, presumably. And so if they don't take that seriously after 17 levels in 6 years, then there's really not much that can be done for them. You want them to come away satisfied, even if you think it's kind of hokey or cheap or whatever, because you can't control what the players want for their characters, and you can control where the narrative goes, and it'd be fully within your right to just say the scope of the narrative goes up to here, and that is where we're going to end it. But I would just push back on like why you feel like that's necessary to be that autocratic and something that's supposed to be a collaborative storytelling
Yeah.
effort.
Let's check out some comments here. This one from Klon Style says, reading through the post, I think you shouldn't give them blank checks, so to speak. Give them a frame. You've built 6 years of narrative weight. Letting players rewrite it in an epilogue risks whitewashing consequences, flattening arcs, and robbing the game of earned gravity. The devil deal meant something. Keep it. I could suggest structuring it in with clear limits. For example, the world state must remain the same. They can't resurrect the dead, rewrite history, or undo established outcomes. They can say where they go, what they do, who they try to reconcile with, but not how the world reacts unless it's neutral or plausible. Veto God mode entirely. If someone writes, and then my character is crowned ruler of X, you either vet it or cut it. Leave space for influence, not domination. Let them write what my character tries to do, and you then narrate how the world answers to that. That's the DM way for me. If they can't accept that, they don't want to write endings. I'm afraid they want to rewrite consequences. Don't let them.
That's very insightful. I was going to suggest that there might be a bit of kind of pulled out scope. Here's what I'm trying. Here's what I try to achieve, and blah 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 X, Y, and Z, and then you get to say yay or nay to kind of each thing. I try to, rectify this problem that I had with corrupting this guy, and I do, and he says, well, he just doesn't seem like he's having it, and the character can be like, I just spend the rest of my life trying to like remove that guilt from my conscience. Like it's a dark ending, but if it's something that matters to them, then they shouldn't give up so easily. But there probably is some wiggle room in there. Um, but I guess I would have to push back on like what I mean, yeah, God mode, it does. It will rob your campaign of any gravity and consequences. And he's right. They don't want to write endings. They want to rewrite the history of the campaign but if you've done a good job up to this point, they will not want to do that. They will respect the narrative that you have crafted, and you have to give them the opportunity to respect that, because if you've played with these people for this long, there's no way they don't appreciate your efforts. So
Another one here from BrewMD says, I prefer the epilogue of what do you want to do? At the end of the campaign, the players head off to do these things, or at least to attempt them, to start them off. Setting up an orphanage? Fine. Building a wizard tower? Go for it. Saving the NPC or getting out of a deal with a devil? Absolutely not. That might be their plan, but should not be realized. You always want to leave things open for the potential to revisit characters later. And if they've all achieved every goal and died a natural death happy and peaceful, there's no motivation or opportunity. I thought about that earlier because I have been a fan of bringing in old PCs as NPCs, or even family members of old PCs, or even just lineages from campaigns of old.
yeah,
And if you do, if like the last one was saying, if you let them go God mode, that can just kind of it doesn't make it as impactful.
yeah.
To maybe this character here later on, the next party hears stories of this guy that totally fucked up and spent the rest of his life ashamed of what he did and tried to fix it, but was never able to, and now this curse is upon this family for a very long time.
You you rob you rob yourself the ability to mine previous campaigns for future content. And open conflict is the way to do that. See, the PC is not where my mind went. Let's just say you take another you start another campaign in a while. It's in the same world, and it's, I don't know, a decade later. And maybe the corrupted NPC is now been going down that path for a long time, and now they're like positioned to be like a big bad or like a lieutenant of some sort. You can mine that, and it gives the players some member berries, and also gives them the opportunity to rectify that with another character, because the player can have a redemption arc that the character does not. And you rob yourself of the ability to do that. I try to not be too heavy-handed with the member berries, because I like each campaign to kind of stand on its own, but sprinkled in like a little bit of salt on a steak is good.
Mm,
And you don't want to close every loop. I mean, think of any narrative that has dramatic tension. There probably is still some unresolved things, unless you're just going super high fantasy, super heroic, super like, idealized, whatever. But I would posit that if there was a main character in the plot that was like corrupting an NPC, that's probably not where your campaign's going, a la Lord of the Rings. It's going to be more, uh, it's going to kind of have its toes in a lot of different ponds, so to speak. So, I mean, it can work to say that this is the tone and this is the tenor that I'm going with, and but your players would conceivably rob future opportunities. But I guess I'm just not a fan of being so I guess draconian with
mm.
telling your players that you can't do it. You should either do it or don't do it. And if you're not going to do it, then establish an ending or whatever. But there probably is a splitting the baby. But if you're going to go with allowing the players to have the autonomy to decide their own endings, and you want to put some guardrails on, that's okay, but I would just say don't be too rigid in them, because you're teasing the players with being able to do something, i.e., write their own ending, that you're not really comfortable unless it's what you want. And it's really not about what you want for the end of the campaign. It's about for what the characters want, the players want.
Yeah, like David was saying earlier, um, you don't have to come right out and say, "Hey, don't do this, don't do that." Kind of just lean into it a little bit. Into, hey, at the end of this campaign, how about we all write our epilogues? We're gonna do, it's gonna be like a couple years later. The party's gonna come back, and on the anniversary of this final fight, and they all get to tell, what have they been up to and all this. What have you, and this is where you tell them, what have you accomplished? What have you failed at? What is something that that you're still working towards? Give them some ideas,
Hmm.
and make it sound a lot more epic. That if, yeah, I just, everything I do so in, beautiful fashion. That's
Hmm.
boring. Let them know, especially like what have you failed at? What has been on your mind this entire time? That stuff. When as soon as they hear these keywords, they're like triggers that are just like, holy shit. That if they are really in it for the story and not just the glory of their character, they'll take those things and really say, oh, that's actually really good. This is something that I should look into.
Even if the characters don't reconvene, let's just say you're handling it in cinematic style, where like we zoom in on each of the characters because they've saved the world or whatever, and they're all
Mm-hmm.
off on their own journeys, and we just kind of push in on them years later as to what they're doing. Probably a good way to frame it would be, what are the things from the campaign that this many years later, failures or successes, are still with you, and how are you grappling with them?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Right, because if the characters just underwrite all of their, like they just rectify every mistake they made in the campaign, and they're just sitting happily in some cottage or some manor house that they've built, I would, I mean, if the player finds that satisfying, okay. But unless you're playing with like middle schoolers, I wouldn't suspect that they would, because the things that we carry forward, especially if you were a battle-hardened adventurer, they would say something about your character. You fought for X amount of years to like save the world or whatever, and then it was all just clear sailing from there.
Yeah.
Nothing ever I Everything that I did wrong, I like managed to fix, and I just sit on top of the mountain, happy as a pig in shit. It's like, okay, campaign over, I guess. It's just
Yeah.
like that doesn't seem super satisfying, and unless you had a sense, I would suspect that the characters, like, that wouldn't be in line for the characters, and the players wouldn't want that for them unless you got a sense throughout the entire campaign that they just didn't like adversity, they didn't like inner conflict, they didn't like any bad
Mm.
outcomes. So if you've been a real cushy GM like up to this point, I mean, if you took 6 years to get to level 17, I don't think that you're like given with both hands here. but maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe the levels did come fast and easy, and but it doesn't sound like that. And in which case, the players have faced some adversity, their characters have faced adversity, and in which case, you know, the 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 epilogue for them should be appropriate. It should be a bright spot, but there should still be some lingering things like, oh, I fought in the Second World War, but then once I got home, you know, I managed to just not let my best friend down in the trenches, and we reconciled, and you know, everything's better now, and I just lived happily ever after. And never had any trauma from the war or anything. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, I guess if that's the way you want to end it, then knock yourself out.
Yeah, sure. And you know, sometimes the really easy stuff is really good. My player Jason, in one of our campaigns where we did an epilogue, uh, he said that he went and he chose a stump. He sunk his sword into the stump and then built a farm around it. And then he talked about the family that grew and his business and all that around it. And it was very short and sweet. He only talked for like maybe 3 minutes about it, but it was really good. Very simple. But again, but that's not taking, you know, the shit from the story and like breaking it. That was just a nice little addition.
Right, but you could also choose to see that as the completion of an arc, like hanging up your spurs. I've done this good, and now what I want is a quiet life,
Yeah.
which is what you would want if you were still processing that trauma. And the reason that that's good is it's economic, and it doesn't need to say like this guy is kind of like that life is no longer for him, and that trauma of the past is because it's not a glorious ending, right? It's not glorious the way the campaign is glorious. It's quiet and it's
Yeah.
subdued, and that's what makes it a good ending.
All right. Well, I think that's going to bring us to the end of this episode. Do you have anything to add on there, David?
I got nothing else.
All right. Well, then we'll just call that one a good night.
And good luck.